Let me begin by thanking the panelists for their extraordinary contribution. Reverend Jackson called me about 24 hours ago and he said, "Son, I want you to wrap up this panel." I spent time typing and writing, and I lost a lot of sleep getting some of my thoughts together, and I am so grateful. I identify with what Reverend Yerry had to say. He said that we are reclaiming moral authority, that we are somebody, that 400 years of resistance does matter. I want to thank Reverend Yerry for taking us on that mental flight back to the origins of the days that we experienced human liberty and the 400-year sojourn that we have endured as a people. I want to thank Professor Makaitis. He said any fight must reclaim the past for an honest assessment of non-European history towards a unified American history. No profounder words have been made than those by John Adams, Professor Makaitis, who said that we are destined to be peopled by a single religion, a single culture, a single language, that we will be, with our struggle, a single people. Professor Jonathan Jackson, in the beginning, Jonathan said, we are doomed to repeat. Without knowing our history, there is a struggle between reframing the truth and framing the truth. People want, Jonathan said, the truth. He quoted before the Mayflower, Dr. Lerone Bennett Jr., and he talked about what was initially a week under the leadership of the late Carter G. Woodson, Black History Week, which later expanded to a month. I want to position a few thoughts that I hope build upon the consistency of the panelists, Reverend, and make some sense of a single narrative that makes sense, yes, for African Americans, but indeed makes sense for all Americans, because like Lerone Bennett Jr. said, we were here before the Mayflower. Like Martin Luther King Jr. said, we were here before Thomas Jefferson etched the magnificent words of the Constitution of the United States, more specifically, since he was not at that convention, the Declaration of Independence in 1776, that all men are created equal. And yes, fast forwarding it all the way up to the early 60s, Brother Malcolm X, that we did not land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. From 1619 to the present, I am overwhelmed by the philosophy and the religion of pessimism. In that philosophy, it is hard to reconcile anything positive that has emanated from America's original sin. From Jamestown to Charlottesville, from George Washington to Donald Trump, from north to south, from Christian colonization to manifest destiny, from the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses who yearn to breathe free, to building a wall on our southern border. The philosophy of Christian religion of pessimism can quickly lead to the philosophy of Christian religion of cynicism and hopelessness. However, the entire American experience for African Americans is indeed all Americans and our global neighbors move from pessimism to eternal optimism, brothers and sisters, from Sweden, on a single belief, the belief in a mighty God. This Christian religion and philosophy of eternal optimism replaces the religion of pessimism with a healthy sense of skepticism. The tragedy of 1619, when viewed through the lens of Jonah in the belly of the whale, becomes the triumph of God's hand in human history. The religion of optimism moves us from the tragedy of being eaten by a whale to the triumph that God has now given us access to his vital organs. The tragedy of 1619, when viewed through the lens of Moses, I would rather be in Moses' movement than Pharaoh's army. No matter how vast Pharaoh's army, no matter how powerful the commander of the army is, the hand of God in the parting of the Red Sea is still on our side in the journey. The tragedy of 1619, when viewed through the lens of the children of Israel, we would rather be on the side of God's law than lawlessness. James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet the scaffold sways the future, for behind the dim unknown standeth God, keeping watch above his own. That church is the Christian religion of eternal optimism. Too many of our pastors and churches have now become overwhelmed by the Christian religion of eternal pessimism. The tragedy of 1619 has awakened us to the idea that God has a land of milk and honey for us, that all men and women are free, that we have equal protection under the law, where every citizen has a right to participate in the destiny of human liberty, and we have a right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. The tragedy of 1619 and the pre-construction of America from 1619 to 1776 would lead to the need for the construction of America between 1776 and 1791. The deconstruction of America between 1861 and 1865, the reconstruction of America between 1865 and 1896, the era of Jim Crow from 1896 to 1954, the second reconstruction of America from 1954 to the departure from the White House of Barack Obama, to the second deconstruction of the United States under the election of President Donald Trump, 2016 to 2020, and the need, it is as clear as the nose in the middle of every one of our faces, the need for a third reconstruction beginning in 2020. It seems to me, Daddy, if we can look at the lens of human history through the lens of blue sunshades, the whole world would look blue. If we look at it through the lens of Native Americans, the whole world would look red. If we look at human history through the lens of a white lens, we see a different point of view. But if you look at American history through the lens of the Negro, you see a behavior and an activity before the Constitution, before the Mayflower. We see a behavior and an activity after the Constitution. We see a behavior amongst Americans, Bill of Rights notwithstanding. In 1791, we see the post-construction construction of America. We see the whole thing fall apart over the Negro. Some states decided they no longer wanted to be United States. And then through a great civil war, we had to re-add and fight as Americans in an internecine warfare amongst brothers and sisters over the Negro's citizenship rights, and the 13th and the 14th and 15th Amendments added to the Constitution. It seems to me, Reverend Jackson, that we have to move beyond broad generalities to the specifics of the matter to arrive at the truth. In our broad strokes of human history and American history, we can never truly capture the specifics of what took place and the process by which we change our circular and triangular thinking into linear thinking and action. The foundation of our common understanding must be truth. If we are not interested in the details of the common understanding, then we cannot arrive at the truth. And the truth is necessary for progress. We are not making any progress under Donald Trump because there ain't no truth in him. If you are not interested in the details, then probably we should follow Donald Trump's recommendation and go back to where we came from. But I'm going to stay because I'm not going anywhere. Therefore, I have taken great interest in the details of my decision to remain here for me and my children, and whether you want it or not, for you and your children too. I prefer, Dr. Yeary, the theological view and vantage point with historical insight of these events. Therefore, I am hopeful and eternally optimistic. Theology allows us to search for triumph in tragedy. We must reconcile the tragedy of 1619 with the excitement of Barack Obama. It's difficult to have one without the other. 400 years later, in 2019, reconciling tragedy and triumph. Whoever inserted birthright citizenship in the Constitution actually matters to us today. Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall would catch hell coming to America on this day. Thank God for birthright citizenship. The American Negro is unique. We are not just a was, we are an is, and we are an ought. There are two 4th of Julys Reverend Jackson alluded to in his remarks, one on July 4th, 1776, and the other on July 4th, 1863. On the is of July 4th, 1776, slavery had existed in America since 1619. Not a single signer, however, of the Declaration of Independence or later the Constitution was alive in 1619. The signers and the founders were born into an existing slave system. That's the truth. So blaming everything on the founders is not true. I expect to get hit in the head on this one a little bit later. 1776 minus 1619 is 157 years. Thomas Jefferson was not alive for 157 years and then wrote the Declaration of Independence. He wasn't there in 1619. When he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he inherited slavery, including owning some, and yet through that inheritance came an ideal that all men are created equal. Alexander Hamilton was not alive in 1619. He'd be 167 years old by the time the Constitution were written if you're going to blame him for 1619. Can't do it. What the founding fathers established, and this is where God is. I know my time is up and I know the hour draws near. What the architects of our republic established, however imperfect, with all of the compromises at the Constitutional Convention between 3/5 of a human as a subhuman person, Africans, and big states versus small states, what they accomplished, and maybe their only accomplishment at the Constitutional Convention, is this: a process by which we, the people, can change America and replace the old with the new. Daddy, before the Constitution, there is no process. There's no process. I go ask this slave holder, I was going to break away to freedom today. I can leave on my own, buy myself out of slavery, make it to the next county, and end up in slavery again. Or lynched again. Can't even get out the same state to get to a northern state to get to freedom. There was no, watch this, Jakes, there was no process. The founding fathers deserve the credit for the process. Slavery had existed long before the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. But there was no process for people who inherited the system, but for the establishment of diverse interests at the convention. Yeah, they had to eat slavery and they had to eat women inequality. They had to eat it all. But they established the process by which we might be able to fight for an equal rights amendment guaranteeing women the same amount of money that men make for doing the same job. It is a crime in America 400 years after slavery for women to be making 50 cents to the dollar of what men make, and yet they cannot buy bread cheaper, they cannot pay rent cheaper, they cannot go to school cheaper. They deserve an equal rights amendment to the process. As long as we have, Congressman Rush, a states' rights process, of course there are going to be 50 different school systems. And as many county systems as well, 3,067 county systems. There are 20,000 cities in America, 20,000 Lori Lightfoots. You can spend the rest of your life trying to rebuild equal, high-quality public schools for every single American and not meet every single mayor in America to get it done. You have to have an amendment to the process where all citizens shall enjoy the right to a public education of equal high quality, and instead of going to 50 different legislatures, we need one Congress to determine one standard for all of the American people in this process. This past week, Reverend Jackson, Governor Jay Inslee left the presidential campaign as the single climate change environmentalist in the race for president. Forest fires in California, forest fires in Nevada, forest fires in Washington State. They're burning the Amazon down. Ain't no more rain. Fish can't swim north no more. Polar ice caps melting. We can't fix the environment one state at a time. We deserve a constitutional right to a clean, safe, and sustainable environment for all Americans so 350 million of us can go to court and sue. The very structure of America requires amendments to the process. It is the only nonviolent way out. There's some flaws in the process. The Supreme Court says that every one of us has the right to a gun in the Second Amendment. Brothers and sisters from Sweden, one of the flaws of America, something you don't have to worry about, in America, you have the constitutional right, by definition, to get shot. But we don't have the constitutional right to check into a hospital after we get shot. That's a flaw in America, and it belongs in the Constitution. You see, it's a function of the lens that you put on. It seems to me that the broadest struggle, Brother Rush, Reverend Jakes, is to find the broadest possible interpretation that is inclusive of everybody. I did not just give Reverend Jackson an analysis of your panel on the basis of what Jesse Jr. talked about was for blacks only. What I shared with you was the pre-construction of America, and the construction of America took the condition of the Negro into account. And so through seeing America from that perspective, we have the power to grant everybody else their rights. I don't mean no harm, but let me tell you something. My brothers and sisters are right on the southern border. But they're not just right for themselves. My dad said in 1984, 1988, they must be right for everybody. Red, yellow, brown, black, and white were all precious in God's sight. His grandmama used to take when it was cold outside and cold in their house, he used to take a patch. And the patch may be a white patch, the patch may be a blue patch, the patch may be a red patch, the patch may be a LGBTQ patch, it may be an environmental patch. But when grandmama took her piece of thread and she weaved the patches together, she ended up with a mighty quilt. And the quilt had the power to provide everybody with warmth. This is the broadest story. Of course, Newt Gingrich, Jonathan, is going to react negatively. He believes in states' rights. He's not trying to build a more perfect union. Oh yes, brothers and sisters from around the country and around our city and around our nation. Watch this now. We have a nation that can build a highway from New York all the way to California under one set of federal rules. When you fly back to Sweden, you will leave from an airport and you will land on a runway somewhere in this country or somewhere in this world determined by our federal government to make sure that the pilot has a reasonable expectation that when he takes off from an airport in Chicago, he will have the same length of runway when he lands somewhere else on earth. This problem cannot be solved one state at a time. Some states don't want airports. They want horse and buggy. Some states don't want an interstate system. They want just a sidewalk and a highway and a byway. But if we're going to build a more perfect union for industry and trucks and trains and planes, when America are we going to start building a more perfect union for the people? Reverend, this is our story. And so we end on this. The founding fathers are responsible for principles. They are responsible for process. They are responsible for individual rights. And they put that system on top of an existing slave system. Slave system ain't gone nowhere. Anytime we deny women their basic rights and the LGBT community their basic human rights, anytime we deny people access to equal high quality schools, anytime we deny people access to health care, anytime we have to be incarcerated disproportionately than any other group in this country. You can't tell me that's not the new Jim Crow. Michelle Alexander is right on that. But it's not enough, Dad, in the religion of pessimism, to complain about what you don't have. The God that I serve is going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. You got to use what you got. Dr. King said that he'd looked over the course of human history. And if he could take a mental flight, he would stop by Egypt, where he would see a Pharaoh unwilling to free the Israelites. He would watch a man emerge from the Hebrew community, provide leadership for the Israelites, receive the commandments of God himself, deliver the law to his people, and watch Pharaoh's army consumed by a Red Sea. But Dr. King said, as great and momentous as that occasion was, I wouldn't stop there. He said, I'd go by Rome, and I'd look at man's turn towards the direction of self-government and human freedom, and yet watch a vast colonizing empire spread across the world, and yes, spreading its own white supremacy, and occupy a province called Judea. As much as he'd love to walk with the master and talk with the disciples and have been there for the master at the crucifixion and to watch, if he could have, the resurrection, as profound as that event was, Dr. King said, I wouldn't stop there. He said, I'd come on up to 1863, and I would watch a vacillating president torn between saving his nation and what to do with the Negro issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And as proud and profound as that moment was for people learning for freedom, he'd love to watch it. He said he wouldn't stop there, though. He said he'd walk up and watch a president looking at the economic fiscal straits of his nation and declare to the American people that they had nothing to fear but fear itself. And as deep as the moment was, all of our economic determinism, if we had more money, if we had some reparations, he said as heavy as that moment was that created Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, if he could watch that moment as proud as he was, and it was, he wouldn't stop there. He said, Daddy, if I could just ask the Almighty to allow me the opportunity to live, he said, in the latter half of the 20th century, where I would see the people of Ghana standing up and the people of South America standing up, and where I see the people of Sweden joining the Reverend Jesse Jackson and black and white together. If I could just see that moment when Barack Obama accepted the nomination of his political party in his nation, if I could just see the moment that we stopped complaining about what we don't have, that we turned to each other and not on each other, and decided we were going to build a more perfect union and a more perfect world together. Thank you, and God bless you all.